Paddock is a training and exercise space for sport education and performance. Each week, we look to grow ideas and innovation through conversation from beautiful Auckland, New Zealand. Welcome to this week on the Paddock with Zac Moulder. Zac Moulder, he's a former student of mine, another really great Kiwi young guy. Can't say he's a Kiwi guy, he's a Kiwi young guy. With today's topic, which is experiential based learning, I thought nothing better than to talk with Zac, who we've gone through a long journey of experiential based learning. Zac is a graduate of the Bachelor's of Applied Sport and Exercise Science. He also has a level 1 accreditation with ASCA, has a sports med accreditation as well. We ask, why does he have this? Because his big focus area in regards to sport is strength and conditioning. So he is an academy strength and conditioning coach for the New Zealand Warriors. He's also the assistant under 18 coach, strength and conditioning coach for the Kiwis, and head trainer for Counties Manukau Rugby League. And you're involved, I believe, as well with the Otahu Leopards. But
Yes.
on the 9 to 5, he's with Marcellin College. He's the director of sport at Marcellin College. I'm really happy that young high school kids are getting the chance to have your leadership. Zac, welcome on board to the Paddock. Awesome to have you on board and to talk about experiential based learning today.
Oh, thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. I mean, that was an amazing intro. You just rolled everything off the tongue. I mean, like even I couldn't do better in a job interview. So that was amazing. You're
Well,
honestly too kind.
well,
Um,
that's why you got to go to more job interviews so you can actually practice experiential based learning.
Next time I'll let you know when they call the references too. That was
um, well, Zac, it's been a funny year. So where are you at?
Mm.
Where are things at? I mean, you're the director of sport at Marcellin College. We're still in this extended lockdown in Auckland. How are things looking, and what's your day to day at the moment in your role?
So in a nutshell, we were quite lucky at Marcellin to get through a lot of our winter seasonal sports. So generally we run our winter codes between term 2 and the start of term 3. So we kind of went into lockdown just before we were going to go into a couple of tournaments, which was really unfortunate. But we were blessed enough to be able to finish a lot of that winter code stuff, especially for our senior students and our year 13s. The aim for term 4 was to jump straight into summer sport for our junior years, so year 9 and 10, and obviously our year 7 and 8s as well. Unfortunately, due to the alert levels, we haven't been able to get into anything like that. And with sort of what's looking like, what the road is looking like in the future, in the near future, is not looking possible either. So we've just been trying to keep our students engaged through their normal classwork. So I've been jumping in on some PE classes, helping out with their little extra fitness during things like that. But mainly day to day for me at the moment is getting together all the planning for next year, and making sure that when we do hit the ground running in 2022, we have the right coaches and right resources in place already, so that it's just a smooth transition into the new year.
Cool. Well, I mean, it's been a difficult year and a strange year for all of us, but that's good to know. That's good to know that despite the circumstances, you've been able to actually get a lot done and looking forward into 2022. In the intro, I did mention your strong interest in strength conditioning.
Yes.
Um, how did that come about? Because you're really involved at the moment.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. So probably halfway through, oh geez, thinking back now, it must have been my first year. I got approached by Graham Sequeira, obviously, who is a wonderful lecturer with yourself at MIT. Also, shout out to Graham for the amazing podcast he did with you last time. That was incredible insight. I love talking to GRAM. He's got so much knowledge. So he had got in contact with a gentleman called Ed Baranowski, who was the ex-Manchester City strength and conditioning coach who had now relocated over to New Zealand. And he had taken on the head of high performance for the Howard Pakatanga Swim Club, which was just a local swim club. It competed in regional and national competitions with its swimmers. Um, so it was quite a big club based in out of Pakatanga College, and they had a land development program, which was also partly headed up by an ex-student, Charlotte. So I was fortunate enough to start an internship with Howard Pakatanga Swim Club in the strength and conditioning space. Knew absolutely nothing about it, but just knew that gift of the gab helped, and being able to talk and coach athletes through their gym programs and things like that. And thanks to Ed and Charlotte through their personal development of us, I managed to get fall in love with the trade. And from there, spent a few years in the internship, learning and growing under their tutelage, and then was blessed enough to be able to have an opportunity to work at the Warriors in their foundation space, thanks to MIT's very own Junior Maltidi, the amazing man. So he gave me an opportunity, and I just tried to take it with both hands. And it's almost like you just kind of show up every day until they and until something different happens. And fortunately enough, I've been able to stay there for the last 2.5 years. So, and then obviously that door has opened up other opportunities within the sport of rugby league, which is the code I'm working at the moment. So swimming to rugby league was a big step, but I did actually enjoy jumping into a completely different code.
And that's a big reason why this week I wanted to actually talk to you about experiential based learning, because I think you are the example of taking on board experiences and learning and moving forward,
Mm.
and putting that into your toolkit, and actually growing in the industry and making each one of those experiences something that you're going to be using moving forward. Um, the experience with swimming, like you say, very different, very different to
Yeah.
rugby league. Um, but how did that help? How did that environment help to actually navigate yourself well into rugby league?
Yeah, so when I first started, I had never really coached anyone in a gym before. I'd done a little bit of practical sessions, as you do through your degree, but it was kind of my first time on the gym floor actually coaching athletes. So I think the biggest things I took from that was how to communicate effectively. Using only using 5 words instead of 7. Trying to hone that skill of being an accurate communicator, because obviously the better you can communicate to an athlete, the better they understand it, the faster they learn, the more time they're in doing their work. So that was definitely probably one of the biggest transitions I took from HBK into the Warriors, was just being able to, being an effective communicator in a one-on-one setting. And the one thing with HBK was that majority of the time the gym sessions looked the same. So everyone was in their routine. Swimmers have a very particular routine of their training that doesn't vary a lot. So like the distances, what they do in the pool is pretty much all laid out for them. And we tried to mimic the same in the gym. So it was pretty much a very routine based training. So heading into the Warriors, where the same is applied, but you have a lot of other factors that start to jump in. So one big transition for me was having to be able to think on my feet really quickly,
Right.
particularly in say like a field session, a field setting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the communication side was what I carried over from Howick.
Now, when you're talking about thinking on your feet, which is such an important thing when you're on a field setting, of course,
Mm.
and you've also mentioned the importance of that communication, and learning those skills and how to reduce your commands from 7 words to 5 words.
Yeah.
I had the experience of being overseas with you on again an experience-based learning environment in South America, where
Yeah.
the language was not English, and you were definitely put on the spot with regards to communication. Um,
Sure.
how did you navigate that? Because you were quite young on that first trip. Because you did 2 trips with me,
Yes.
but on that first, let's look at that first trip, and
Yeah.
we're actually celebrating. Was it 3 years ago now? On this
Yeah.
week?
Yeah. It was actually. Man, that
It was
makes me feel old.
yeah, it was 3 years ago this time a year, 3 years
Yeah.
ago that we were overseas, with vast experiences across different sectors, from very low deciles to very high decile, from school environments to club environments
Mm.
with junior players all the way up to prem players that are on national teams. And we even had the great experience of going to Patagonia, to a rural environment where
Yes.
their closest rugby was what, 500 kilometers away or something.
Yeah.
The closest game that they played was 500 kilometers away. But again, as a young um, student, you were still a student at that point.
Mm.
How did that communication, in that experience-based learning, how did the communication kick in? How did you live that process?
It was a honestly, it was a deep end, a massive deep end. I don't think I've ever jumped into a deep end that big before. And like you say, because I was so young, I think there was a little bit of naivety around what we were going into. So I magically thought that everyone would understand English, or loud English, as I tried in the beginning. You know, if you say the English words louder, people might understand you, which definitely wasn't the case. And not knowing a lick of Spanish either was a big component in that. So I mean, like, we found early on, like myself, and obviously Cams, who went with us, found early on that uh, obviously people learn in lots of different ways. So if speaking and communicating wasn't getting through, just because of the language barrier, it was probably more appropriate that we demonstrate an activity, or we do it in a physical sense. So a simple drill as a catch and pass, and like you say, the levels that we coached at on those 2 trips, and in particularly the first one, heading in not knowing the level of understanding we were going to get.
Yep. Yep.
Some of the players we taught had a really high comprehension of English, and could speak it really well. So in a session like that, you could almost revert back to your, you could say, comfort zone, but you can revert back to how you would normally coach. Maybe it'll be a little bit more technical, start to I guess build a better understanding of this, of the drill with the player. And then some sessions we went into, there were players who had maybe a really good comprehension of English but couldn't speak it very well. So they could understand you, but when they had a question, or they were trying to provide feedback to you in the drill, it just wasn't getting across. And then there were some instances where comprehension and understanding of English and speaking English was really low, and obviously myself not being able to speak Spanish was really difficult. So definitely the practical application of demonstrating a drill, jumping into a catch and pass drill, showing the cues, and then picking up little phrases here and there that we could use, almost like trigger words, like address, auto, things like that, little command words that we could use, where, say, a player was going too fast, or they weren't realigning. We could throw in a trigger word, and they'd understand it, as opposed to us yelling at them like, no, 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 you're doing it wrong. And especially Kiwis, we're not too great on the communication side. We can yeah, English isn't the best to understand at the best of times. So yeah, I guess the practical application for me was probably the biggest way, the easiest way I could almost overcome that barrier.
Yep, and
Um,
and that's a big thing. I mean, in today's paddock, where we're talking about experience-based learning, and experience-based learning is that education that comes with that first-hand experience. And like you said, you were thrown in that deep end of that first-hand experience, and that has to come accompanied with the reflection. It's awesome that we can look back now, 3 years back, and you can see that reflection. You can see what was happening in those in that at that moment. But
mm,
you, like you said, you were thrown in the deep end, and I'll say myself, even as a lecturer and kind of your monitor during this experience,
Mm.
um, we need to continuously readapt and realign to what we were doing. Um, how did you bring in reflection in that environment? Because again, like you said, you were thrown in the deep end, had an overload of experiences,
Mm.
from the hard grounds
Yeah.
to the heat, to the language. I mean, in all sorts of in all sorts of senses, it was a complete deep end.
Mm. Oh, it was 100%. And even just the culture we were at is the first time I'd been to South America, sort of outside the Australia Pacific Oceania region. So I feel like it was definitely an overload of new experiences, new tastes, new senses. The pace over there was incredibly fast. You know, everyone walks with a purpose. People want to get things
That's
done. You know, and us as Kiwis are real chill and laid back. So I think, yeah, being in an environment where there are all these different factors coming at you, and then obviously chucking in the coaching on top of that. Um, I remember after the first session, it was almost just like taking a deep breath after,
yeah.
like a, like you kind of like, wow, what was that? Like you
Yep.
know, what have I just done, sort of thing. Like, and not in a bad way, but more in like I was not expecting that at all. So it kind of slapped you in the face a little bit, that first one, and then from there, just having small conversations with yourself, with Cams, with some of the other coaches at the club, that we were coaching at, even and I guess those small conversations led into reflective thoughts personally. So it was almost like, oh man, like how hard was that catching pastoral? And
Right.
it's like, yeah, so what can we do to make that easier for the next time? Because next time I don't want to be in that same position where we spend 5 minutes standing around because they can't understand me, or I can't understand what they're saying. So those little small conversations and reflective thoughts sort of developed into more, I guess, substantial group reflections.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where, and it almost just happened naturally, and obviously from your lead as well. But having an actual sit down and a discussion over a meal, it might be end of the night or something, and it's been a long day. We've been coaching for hours, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we're eating, or we ate at the most ridiculous times. Um, but it almost, it triggered that conversation to be like, wow, how was today? Like, what were your thoughts? This is what we got tomorrow. What can we take from what we did today into what we're doing tomorrow?
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily like a sit down and have a real rigid, like you had a set number of questions that you had to do. It
Yeah.
was just about having that genuine conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, now that you're mentioning that, I'm kind of seeing ourselves sitting on those tables at those sandwich shops,
Yeah. Yeah.
12:30 at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, having our a huge sandwich and
Figured
having
it.
these conversations, and they actually became the routine. They became
Yeah,
basically our reflective meeting
they
around
did.
around the meal, every single night, and it was huge. I mean, I think when I look back, and now that you're mentioning they were definitely huge. Um,
Mm.
I mean, just to bring a little bit of fun to the conversation, I'm thinking, do you remember the place? Do you remember the place where we had those dinners?
I do, especially for the first one. And I can't remember the name, but I remember it was an outdoor cafe kind of sandwich place, and it honestly felt like it was like 8 o'clock at night. Like, it was really warm. It felt like a New Zealand summer just after the sun had gone down. And we were walking from our apartment to this place. It was maybe like a 10-15 minute walk. And the nightlife is just incredible. Like, there was so many people out. You
Yeah.
think. And then you look at your watch, or you look at your phone, and it's like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. You're like, how is this place still open? And it was packed. Like, there were people just enjoying a meal or having a beer, and I think it was that kind of vibe and energy that kind of, for me personally, I really fed off that, because it was so vibrant and real alive at that time of night. I was able to have those stimulating conversations about what we just did during the day, and you kind of on a buzz. You kind of, new city, you kind of eyes are wide open. um, yeah, but I do remember the spot, and I remember we used to sit outside, and it was a beautiful spot, and the the Italiano sandwich was definitely my favorite, with truckloads of avocado.
Exactly, exactly. And I remember those nights as well. I think we had long days. We had
Yeah,
afternoon training sessions, and we would do the evening training sessions with adult teams, and then we'd get back to our apartment late at night and go down for a meal. And that meal was actually in a real nice outdoor space, so we could actually just
it was
relax.
good.
But it actually, like you say, it really allowed us to unpack the experiences that we were having.
Yeah,
And it's great that you're mentioning the environment, because a big part of that experience-based learning has to do with incorporating the senses,
mm,
incorporating
100%.
what, like you said, your eyes wide open. Your eyes were wide open. You were seeing so much. You mentioned it was a warm evening. You know what you're feeling in terms of the temperature, the climate. Um,
Mm,
Incorporating and being able to actually bring in that sensory feel of the experience, that you can actually use it as a reminder towards your reflection, was
yeah,
tremendous.
yeah,
and
100%.
and even and we were doing this, and this was allowing us to actually get better, and because
Yeah, yeah,
we were facing different groups, every day we're facing different groups and different teams, different clubs, in terms of the trainings that you were going out and having that experience in doing the coaching. But
mm,
remember that one night that we went out to this real impoverished community. So, and it wasn't necessarily a safe community, further out from the center of town.
mm.
And we were expecting, I think, to coach the senior team and like the under 18s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us what happened there.
Wow. So I think we were kind of. Would you say we're halfway into the trip? It doesn't definitely wasn't early on. We had a few sessions under our belt.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously, due to the reflections and kind of what we had experienced, we thought we were coming into group to coach a group of, like, say, maybe 30 to 50 players spread between the three of us,
yeah,
or including our translator. So, we definitely, personally for me, we were kind of approaching it as we were kind of thinking about it in the car. We'd already had our planning set out. But I mean, there's only so much prep you can do. So we were kind of rolling in. I was rolling in thinking, oh, it'll be run of the mill. These are the drills we're going to do. This is the gear we're going to have. You kind of have a preemptive idea of what you're going to do. And we get there, and there's at least
but
over
hold
a
on,
hundred.
but hold, before you get to that part, remember getting to the place, how it
Oh,
was?
it was, and the car ride was just like a real eye opening. You just kind of like, wow, this is incredible. And you rock up in these big gates, and there's cops everywhere, and it's just it was a real surreal experience. I've never been in an
Yeah,
area
yeah,
like that before,
yeah,
so that almost took my mind off what we were going to do,
yeah,
because on a normal night of training in New Zealand, you kind of everything's the same. You roll in, you know what you're expecting, the environment you're going to expect, so you can always think about what you're going to do, or your plan. But here we were so distracted about what was going on around us. You're so right.
and it was a rough area, very, very, very rough area of town. And myself, I mean, I couldn't remember having been in an area that rough. And basically, like you say, those huge gates, and I'm going like, okay.
Yeah,
And I was worried, because I was basically your lecturer, and I was looking out for you boys, and I know I wanted to generate these experience-based learning environments. But
mm,
this was a club, developing club, that was really keen on us coming out and supporting them, which was cool.
yeah,
But I didn't expect that either. And then we drive in, they open the gates, we drive
yeah,
in, they close the gates right behind us to keep everything
yeah.
safe.
Oh.
And what did we find inside, Zach?
Oh, there was thousands of people there. We were having it honestly felt like that. There was probably over 120 people,
Yeah,
and not just people there, like the 120 players,
yeah,
plus their families and who they came with, and then there were people that they were there to watch. It was incredible, and it was almost real intimidating, because you're walking in and you feel like you're walking into the middle of a stadium almost,
yeah,
even though it was just a grass field, and the area wasn't super flash, and so you're kind of walking in, and you're like, oh, maybe these guys are here for another training.
yeah,
We got our group,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden, We link up with the club liaison there, and I think she spoke a little bit of English, and we're kind of prepping our gear, getting our cones set up and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the setup, you're kind of like, oh yeah, so this is your group here, and you're looking at like all of these faces. And it wasn't just like 120 under 18s players. It was like you had your under sixes, and there might have been like 20 of them, and then you had your under 12s, which are obviously like twice their size, and then you had some under 18s, under 16s players. Then you had some senior prem players, some guys that just
Yep.
that just jumped in. And then we also had some female athletes from various ages as well. So I mean, like the skill level and the knowledge level and the comprehension level of these players was so, you almost got almost every level on the spectrum.
Yep.
And there's only three of us trying
Yep.
to accommodate.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. It was an incredible evening, because I think nothing could have prepared us for that amount of people, and there's no preparation in place for us to actually be prepared for that. And when you talked about thinking on your feet, this is probably the biggest experience with
Mm,
regards to thinking on your feet.
yeah,
We were put on the spot, myself included. We had to actually manage the group. We
yeah,
needed to decide what is it that we were going to do, who takes who, and how to create an experience. It was
yeah,
an experience for us, but at the end of the day, more than a training session, it was how do we create an experience within a club, a community that was very appreciative that we had actually taken our time to go out there and
exactly.
to coach the rugby.
So it wasn't like we could afford to just sit back and or wait 20 minutes to actually replan a session. They were there, they were ready to learn, and they were grateful that we were there. So we had to provide, like you say, provide an experience for them that they were expecting. We couldn't afford just to sit back and be like, oh, actually, we only planned for 30. We're not going to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you
yeah,
you've gone all that way, and it was exciting. It was nerve wracking, but it was exciting. And like you said, it almost just turned into session management as opposed to actually quality and content of the drill.
yeah,
But for what we were approached with, that was perfect. It fit really nicely.
yeah.
They weren't expecting a really high quality detailed drill. They just wanted something. So that's what we had to provide.
Exactly, and I think we had that experience like you were mentioning because this was around the back of the Maori All Black tour to South America 3 years ago,
Yeah,
that we were out there as well, and they were expecting a session, and
yeah,
we were surprised when we were at the Maori All Black game on that following Saturday,
yeah.
how some of the kids that were there at that session
Mm,
actually recognized us at the stadium, and they would
yeah.
come up to us and say, "Oh, thank you for going out to our club."
Yeah, it was unreal. And it was like we had obviously been to Patagonia just before that game, so we had I was fortunate enough to stay obviously in Patagonia. We got billeted out to families that we stayed there for a night or so, and the family that I stayed with was actually at the game as well.
Yeah,
So it wasn't like we would have interactions with people at the game from maybe like three different clubs that we had been to, and you're kind of like and you meet so many people along the way, you don't necessarily recognize the face. So, but then you see them in their club gear and they're really keen, and then they come up to you, be like, "Do you remember me?" And you're kind of
yeah,
like, "Wow, this
yeah,
is incredible!" Like, you
yeah.
know,
How's that? I mean, part of learning is not only learning your trade, because I mean, I think during this experience, you were able to apply a lot of what you had learned in the classroom, which is
yeah,
what we want to do through experience-based learning on the field. Um,
yeah,
but there's more learning, and I've loved how you mentioned at the very beginning that some of those soft skills like communications were the things that really kind of came out when you were at HPK, for example, and you also used that in terms of trigger words in Spanish when you were on this overseas experience-based
mm,
learning. But let's go back to that Patagonia trip,
yeah,
on this experience. what learnings did you take from there? Because that was quite special. Because
Oh,
we
that
had
was
been overloaded in Santiago, in the capital
yeah,
city, big 5 million people city,
yeah,
and we took off and went to Patagonia to visit a club, which the closest club to them is 500 kilometers away.
yeah.
How did it feel when we got down there, and how was that experience a part of the enhancement of the learning?
Oh, it was unreal. Absolutely unreal. I've never experienced anything like that before. And I hope I get to go back. So I remember flying in, and it's the first time I've ever been on a big plane with only like 6 people in it. So the plane was empty as, and I remember we got up really early for that. So
Yeah,
I was gonna go. We got up really early for that trip. So it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd had it, and like you say, we had long nights, long days and long nights. So we probably didn't get to bed till maybe like 2 in the morning that
yeah,
night before. Got up at 6, earlier than that, probably like 4 o'clock at the airport at 6. We're standing in a really long line, so you're grumpy, you're kind of tired, you got to jump on another plane for a couple of hours, and not, don't get me wrong, grateful for the experience, but in the moment you're kind of like, oh, you're real drained, you need caffeine, sort of thing.
yeah,
um, and then flying in, you see the mountains, and it just looks like New Zealand, and you're kind of like, wow,
yeah,
I feel like home. And then landing, it's just
yeah,
beautiful and green, and it just really felt like home. And then, like you say, we'd had a completely different experience in Santiago. So everyone was really fast paced. They were really eager to get into things. They come from a very fast paced environment, whereas down there, it was so relaxed. They were there. Everyone was really excited for us to be there, but it was just real humbling to see their passion for the game. The fact that they would drive over mountains, like say over 500 kilometers away, just to play a club rugby game. And coming from my experience coaching in New Zealand, we get players that don't even show up to training, and it's literally 2 minutes down the road.
yeah,
And these people would drive, an hour, sometimes more, just to get to training. And then you look at their training field, and it's literally a paddock.
yeah.
Like it is, there was no line markings.
At a fishing lodge.
At a fishing lodge. So this paddock out the front, and but just to see the eagerness that they had. And then one thing that really caught my attention, and this is obviously me from my strength and conditioning coach background, but they had built this container gym, and it had all this equipment like bands. I had some weights in there, but just the expectation that they had on themselves, that they were just going to be the best that they could be, and they weren't going to let their environment or where they were limit them to how they could perform, which I thought was amazing. The fact that they trained on a paddock, they had a container for a gym. They didn't have any of the best gear. A lot of it was secondhand, but they were just so immersed in the love of the game.
Yeah.
It kind of it takes you back, and it kind of reminds you why we do it.
Yeah, I remember that container gym. Just to give a little bit of context, out in the Patagonia, it snows and it gets really cold. We were there in the spring. It was nice and warm. We had a great time down there. Um, and a shout out to our mate Andres and the Gilligan Rugby Club, which were fantastic to us. Um, but like that container, just to get a picture and a context, they had heaters, and
Mm,
they had like these makeshift stoves, so the kids, when they had their trainings in the winter, they could have hot chocolate after the training because it would be
yeah,
snow outside.
yeah,
um, but they had thought even those minor details to make
yeah,
it accommodating for the players and for the people, just to follow their love of the game and to be the best they could, within the elements that they had down there. And probably, I mean, we have some very, very beautiful rugby fields out here in New Zealand, but
yeah.
this one in the middle of a paddock alongside a fishing lodge was probably out there as probably one of the best rugby fields, in terms of landscape ever.
Oh, it was beautiful. I have a picture of the field. So the fishing lodge was, obviously, it was against the river, So the river was sort of running around the back of the lodge, and then to the front was the paddock, and then a long driveway, and then you could see the road, and then just behind the road was these really steep, picturesque mountains. And I have a picture, and I still have it on my phone today, and I look at it often,
Yeah.
of that, and it's just it's another world. It is honestly just
Yeah.
another world.
Yeah.
And but for them, that's normal. Like that's their that was kind of their that was their home.
Yeah.
Which I thought made it even more special that that was what they were used to. That was their normal, like, yeah,
Yeah, and
incredible.
this and this is the thing. I mean, when we're thinking of, I mean, I know you're strongly involved in rugby league, and all these experiences have actually allowed you to make that that cross and build your professional career
Mm,
through oval ball in rugby league. But I think this is what the understanding about the power of sport and how it drives communities in the most remote
yeah,
places. And sometimes we forget from that
mm,
organizational level, we forget that there is a strong interest in the sport in the remote places, and how to bring support back to them to keep them motivated and keep them going,
yeah,
because you never know, you might have a player coming out of those lands that can probably go the next level, and if they don't, you have a good group of people that are actually keeping the game alive and keeping
yeah,
kids healthy and active. And I think that's I think one of the strong takeaways that we had. I remember that one of the conversations in our reflections, and I think it came after we had that testing session in the Patagonia,
yeah,
and then I think we went to one of the international schools. And our one of our reflection sessions, one of the things that we picked out was the mobility. Do you remember?
yeah,
Do you remember that how that
yeah,
we identified issues with regards to mobility?
yeah. And the I guess that kind of adds into the resources that they have. So they obviously, and it's the same in club rugby level over here. And obviously Auckland rugby is quite an elite competition, so they have staff. We have some really great staff involved in our clubs.
Mm.
But often in Chile, they were just volunteers. Someone who might have had a little bit of knowledge on something. So to have a proper S&C was almost unheard of. But uh, to see the level of skill that they were at, and then compare it to what sort of movement based patterns that they had, there was a massive difference.
Yeah.
But like you say, again, that wasn't a limiting factor for them. We don't have an S&C, we can't be a successful team. No, we're going to do the best we can. And I even, and almost the reverse of that, when we were coaching at alumni, one of their coaches was actually from an S&C background
Yeah.
and jumped into a head coaching role. So I mean, like, it was almost like they got to do whatever they can get to do to get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, and that's a whole thing. Through this experience-based learning, some of the stuff that you were learning in the degree in sports science,
Yeah,
though we were there to coach rugby, and we were there running coaching rugby coaching sessions, it led to reflections that had to do with the theories and aspects that you had learned through your degree, like for example, movement patterns and mobility. So
yeah,
this for me as an academic, as an educator, for me was quite valuable.
mm,
I had my objectives in regards to the experience and the learning that we were going to try to achieve from the trip, but
yeah,
it went in directions that went beyond my expectations.
yeah,
Um,
100%.
I'm going to take you back to, remember that real pompous lunch that we were shouted out in Talca.
Yeah.
Um, that was a different experience as well,
Oh, unreal. And it was
because
one that,
we were there. I want to direct you back to the coaching, because we wanted to coach.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's what we thought we were going to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was the purpose of us being there at the trip. So we rock up to this amazing, almost, it was like a resort. It was like a golf course, and it was completely empty. Almost something out of Miami Vice. Like, it was so weird. It had that kind of feel to it. I feel like I was going to be on the Netflix show. And we walk in, and there's this amazing spread lunch, the most beautiful food I've ever had, and it's just a handful of people, in and around some people from the club we were going to, some representatives in the community,
Yep.
and then we obviously amazing opportunity to be able to have an experience like that, and then we go to coach, at the club, or I think it was at a school.
A
We were
school, a
coaching
school,
at
yeah, a
a school.
school.
Yeah, yeah, coaching at a school, and we were really keen to get into the drills. As we do, we'd been there for a little while. We were kind of like, man, let's just get this started. We jump into a presentation, and the presentation was great. I didn't understand probably any words of it, maybe one or two. And then we jump in, and there was a big focus on PR as opposed
Yeah,
to coaching.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we had a lot of opportunities for photos, and the kids wanted photos with us, and things like that. And I mean, like, we're nothing special. Like, we just, but the prestige of having someone from New Zealand come over,
yeah,
and have that label there, really promoted that. But it also, again, on reflection, in the middle of it, we kind of didn't really know what was going on. We kind of do a drill, and then all
yeah,
of a sudden we'd have a break, and then we'd take some photos, and then we'd do another drill, have a break. But the content that we got through actually wasn't what we wanted to get through at
yeah,
all.
yeah,
And then on reflection, we're kind of thinking, hang on a minute, like, I feel like that session was only there for them as opposed to the kids, if you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that was kind of a bit of a surprise, because I actually took a bit of prompting, and asked those, I guess, critical questions as to, do you think we achieved what we wanted to achieve today? And you kind of think, oh, actually, we only got through 3 out of our 7 drills, but yet we had the same amount of time as we did everywhere else. Why was that? And then you kind of think, oh, actually, we spent half the time taking photos with banners and different banners, and different ones would get thrown in, and then different people would come in, and which was amazing, great opportunity. But at the same time, you kind of like, what were we really there for in their eyes?
yeah.
And yeah, I think that was a big eye opener as well.
I mean, myself as a sports management and administration lecturer, I think that experience that day
Mm,
is an experience around sports management and administration
yeah,
that I cannot replicate in the classroom at all, at all.
no,
Where actually for you as students at that day, you probably captured how sometimes sport is
mm,
just moved by the PR and the interest of those that are managing the sport.
yeah,
What was happening with the kids, what the kids or the players were getting, because we had teenage players there as well,
yeah, yeah,
that absolutely had no importance.
no, not at all.
Not no importance. It was more important to that stakeholder engagement,
Yep,
and
yep,
and that was the purpose behind that session. and
yeah,
and we and when I, for example, when I teach this in class, like the organizational purposes and
mm,
how do we achieve them and how do we achieve stakeholder engagement, to tell you the truth, that day did not fulfill our expectations at all, because that's what we
no,
need to have. We need to have it. We have to go into situations with expectations in
exactly.
experience-based learning. We didn't meet out our outcomes from what our expectations were,
Mm.
but really, from a learning experience, it
Oh,
was
invaluable.
it was invaluable. It was
Yeah,
absolutely invaluable. It actually explained why, for example, a team like the Dallas Cowboys would probably have such pompous facilities,
yeah, yeah,
because this organization had rented this country club, which was
yeah,
amazing, and we weren't even and there was nobody there, and we were not even
yeah.
eating in the normal dining room. We had a separate room, an exclusive room for, and you
It
go
was
like,
beautiful.
this doesn't make sense, but it's
Yeah,
basically, this is all about kind of, I don't know,
the
approaching your
image,
stakeholders,
yeah,
and it explains the reasons why corporate boxes exist and how you
yeah,
manage those manage those relationships
100%.
to make things work, and when it comes to sports.
Yeah, and I remember me kind of sitting here thinking, like, do they know who I am? Like, I am not anything special at all. Like, you can mention my name back home and no one would even know who it is. You know what I mean? And but for them, and like, I do like how you brought up the expectation side of things, because from our point of view, our expectations weren't met. That was not
Yeah,
what we went there to do. But probably from their point of view, that was a massive tick in the box.
exactly.
And the way that they went about getting that done, and not, it wasn't in a bad way. Like, we
Yeah,
still were able to coach and give content and things like that, but obviously their main focus wasn't on what we could deliver, but what we could provide in terms of, that, like, say, that stakeholder engagement, that advertising, the PR kind of side of it. And so it almost killed two birds with one stone with them, because we got in,
Yeah,
we did a little bit of coaching, which was great for the kids and
yeah,
beneficial, but for them, they also tick that box.
yeah. And to tell you the truth, and then probably another shout out here, Pedro, which I've never met personally, the president of this foundation. He lives in Washington D.C. And he's the one that set up this thing for us to go down to Talca because he knew that we were in Chile at the moment.
Mm,
um, and it was basically a relationship was born out of that.
yeah,
I've had contact with him over the past 3 years, on and off. He's doing some pretty interesting educational uh, coaching development
mm,
in the northern Chile at the moment through the foundation that organized this event. They are a sports foundation that is working in the development of PE teachers
yeah,
in the space of rugby, and yeah, and it gives you that understanding from the sports education perspective that sports is not only delivered on the field, and it's delivered in multiple channels and avenues. And
yeah,
we, like you said, we didn't have that expectation going into that day. We didn't know we were going thinking of going just into some coaching sessions, but looking back in that reflective process, we did learn quite a bit from that day as well. And that's it. And that's the experiential based learning, that
mm,
you set your outcomes, you set your
yeah,
expectations of what you want students to have as a firsthand experience. But because they are practical firsthand experiences, they are evolving and they're
yeah,
adaptive, and they
yeah,
can go in different directions. And that's where the reflective process comes in, which is
mm,
extremely important, because that's when you have to unpack all the additional content of learning that you get, and that hopefully you were a student back then. Now you're a sport and exercise professional. Um, it's reflective knowledge that you can
yeah.
associate to content that you can use in your professional field now as a professional in the sports sector. Um, Zach, we've gone on for a little bit, but we've actually been able to unpack the experience-based learning quite well. Um,
Mm.
Knowing where you're at now at a school, director of sport at Marcellin College, um, how do you use, or how does these experiences that you've had through Howard Pakuranga, that you've been involved with the strength conditioning, these overseas experiences, if that actually helped your learning journey and your learning process as well in sport, how does that relate now back into your everyday, into your role as director of sport?
That's a great question. I feel like sometimes it's not necessarily almost like a conscious thought. Like it almost becomes second nature because you've had those experiences. So an example I can give for the training side of things, and I'll get to the director of sports stuff in a moment. But for the training side of things, that session we had where we had great massive numbers, like and over 120 players. It was actually a couple of years later, might have been about a year later. I was actually doing a first session with a club, and I was one of the only trainers there, and we had about 70 players come up, and and it came in staggered, so we had 20 here, and then we had like 50 coming up,
Right.
and it was almost you didn't have time to think back into what you had learned, but because you because we'd had that experience, we'd reflected on it. It was already there. So being able to quickly adapt to your feet. Okay, I'm going to warm these guys up. I'm going to give them the rest of what they need to do, and I'm going to quickly go and split this group here and group manage this session and give them what they need to do next. And being able to think on your feet because I had that experience. I feel like if I hadn't had that opportunity in Chile, when it came to the chance of doing it back here at home, I would have been, what am I going to do? You know what I
Right.
mean? And then in terms of the day to day stuff with being in a school, I guess it was an eye opening experience in terms of the hunger that a lot of players had over there for the
Yeah.
sport. Particularly Patagonia, a lot of the other clubs we taught. I mean, almost every club and school we taught at, they were just so in love with the game,
Yeah.
and being able to bring that same hunger and drive back here into New Zealand, where rugby is second nature. It's yeah, we love the game. We have some amazing, passionate people about it. But it just goes, it'll always be in the background. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and for some players it's the everything, and for some it's just something to tick the box.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's about learning, and not just in rugby, but in other sports as well. You know, being in charge of multiple codes is, how do I take those players that are, or those students, those kids that are really passionate about something, and how do I enhance, or how can I help hone that skill into making them a better player, a better person off the field. You know what I mean? How can I take that same passion that they have for this sport and turn it into, passion they have for training? You know, because as we know, lots of players love playing the game, but they don't like training.
Yeah.
So I guess it's again same thing, having those reflective thoughts, triggering those reflective processes that we had, to bringing it back here into the day to day after a game, at school, and you kind of think, wow, what can we do differently there?
Yeah.
You know, what can we change up there?
Talking about that passion, it
Mm.
kind of, it reminded me that visit that we had to Universidad Chile, the professional soccer club,
Yes.
and watching those under seven, I think it was the under 18s that were playing, and you had the under
Mm.
16s and 17s watching the game, and that hunger that those boys showed.
Yeah.
That for me, that visit for me, and just observing that the first team, that first team environment, and their facilities, that was also an eye opener of a professional sport different to what we have here in New Zealand,
Yeah,
but
very much so.
how that cutthroat environment is to actually
Yeah,
get to the next level. I mean, yeah, you do need the passion, but it is cutthroat.
100%.
And then once you make that first team, you just separate yourself out to a
Yeah,
completely other level. Do you remember the car park for that?
I do. I do. And I remember walking, watching the under 18s play, and we were walking up sort of alongside the pitch, and there were all the junior players that might have been kind of there or thereabouts, maybe a little bit younger than that
Yep.
grade, maybe like under 16s, under 14s. And I remember you made the comment, and it stuck with me forever, is, there was a very heavy air amongst the place. There was a lot of tension, and it was almost really an intimidating environment, because these guys are waiting for that opportunity.
Yep.
And it was almost like they were waiting for someone to get hurt,
Yep.
because they'll be the next in line, or they'll be the
Exactly.
third in line. So then they
Yeah.
jump to second.
Yeah.
And that's how gripping it was for them, that it wasn't like they rock up and they're like, oh yeah, no, I'm at, I'm at this amazing football club and I'm an under 18s player. They wanted to get to that next level,
Yeah.
and they were waiting for that opportunity. And I feel like,
Whichever way it opened, actually.
whichever way it opened, 100%,
Yeah.
whether that was through someone's injury or whether that was through them playing well, but they had an expectation of where they wanted to go.
Yeah.
And like you say, over here, sometimes we get that with players. We see it in the Warriors Academy. We get players that are so driven to get to that, to be NRL player, that they train real hard. They train extra sessions and things like that. And then you get some that are just really grateful to be there.
Yeah.
And it's sort of about finding that mix and that balance, because sometimes that drive can be unhealthy.
Yeah.
And you'll know this as a mental skills coach, is that could be all consuming, is to get,
Mhm.
if you only do 2 practices a week, but that's taking up, a lot of your time, a lot of your thinking and things like that, you're not focusing on what's going on in the background. So I guess it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, yeah, and that was real eye opening. And I, as a mental skills coach, I had the luck because I had no idea I was going to meet. Remember their mental
Yes,
skills coach, which was
just like Graham.
he was like Graham. Yeah, he was this guy that had lived in Italy and had been with
Mm.
Milan. He had been with Chelsea. He was also a mental skills coach for Formula One drivers. We had a
Yeah,
brilliant conversations. Probably for me one of the most exciting conversations that we had all trip,
yeah,
in regards
yeah,
to just knowledge and the neurological work that he was doing with the football players down there. So again, learning what I love, and the reason why I have this podcast as well, is it's an ongoing thing, even for the mental skills
yeah,
approach that you've just brought up. I was telling you in a call last night, I was telling the athletes, look, it's not about arousal and just going like hooray, 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 I'm ready to compete. It's about knowing yourself really well, being
Yeah.
open to learning about yourself and putting yourself in that continuous pattern of learning around the
Yeah.
different things that you're doing. And again, I try to live that as well. And I had a lot of learning. I had a lot of learning on that trip as well, not only yourselves as students. And I also learned myself as an educator in how to manage and look after you boys, even though you were adults, in terms of having the best time possible,
Yeah.
but also keeping it very much on the learning ways. And even our museum visits,
Yeah.
that was actually eye opening for me in terms of actually connecting even more
Mm.
clearly with the Whakapapa here in New Zealand. Actually, something that was always present in my past life in regards to Latin America, America, and the relationship of colonization.
Mm.
Basically, that museum visit with you boys and your Kiwi view
Yeah.
of the world actually opened my view of the world quite a bit. And I always remember our standing and looking at one of the statues in the middle of the plaza and
Mm.
looking at now something that had always oblivious to at wow, how intimidating was colonization,
Yeah.
just by looking at the statue of the priest with the sword in the Bible,
Yeah.
so, which was something natural for me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that actually, the same thing kind of triggered my experience because, or similar experience, sorry. When people ask, and we had it all the time, where are you from?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I got Australia, America, UK, and I was like, man, surely by the accent you can tell I'm from New Zealand. But um, when people have this idea of New Zealand, obviously they picture the All Blacks, and the
Yeah.
haka was probably one of the biggest ones. I remember we had a
Yeah.
guy come up to us in the mall, and he saw Cams, and obviously Cams is like 6'9", and he's Fijian, and he's got big muscles and everything like that, and he kind of looked at us, and then he's like, oh, where are you guys from? We're like, New Zealand. He's like, oh yeah, haka, All Blacks. We're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. We're like just buzzing out. But for me, I felt like I didn't know enough about where I was from to accurately represent my country, if you know what I mean.
Wow. Wow.
So when people were asking me where I was from and what it's like, I could only give a small snippet of what New Zealand and what it is to be a Kiwi is about. So that was a drive for me to when I got back home to actually get more in touch with what happens here, and
Nice.
what the situations are here, and what goes on in our communities here, and what it is to be a New Zealander, what it actually means to be from New Zealand, and what it means to work in a sports setting in New Zealand.
Wow.
Um,
I
and
didn't know
and I
that part, Zach. Well, that's
yeah,
pretty
so
cool.
I hope that next time I'm in a position of the same thing where I'm overseas or working with someone who doesn't know a lot about where I'm from, I can accurately give them a proper representation of what it is about to be a New Zealander. And that was again something that you don't learn in a classroom. I would never have learnt that in an experience sitting in front of a laptop in a lecture theatre.
Yeah.
But being in that position, getting asked that question, you're kind of like, oh, actually, what is it like living in New Zealand? And you
Yeah.
don't get that kind of prompting at home. So that was probably a big personal takeaway for me anyway.
That's huge. That's huge. We hadn't discovered, of all the conversations we've had over the years and on that
Yeah.
trip in particular, we had never had that conversation, how it triggered um, what it means to be a New Zealander and
Yeah.
what it means to be a New Zealander in the sporting environment. That's
Mm.
huge. That's huge. I mean, I think you having that level of reflections, I mean, that you surprise me all the time. I think you are going to become every day a better and better educator. Zach, congratulations for what you're doing. Congratulations for what you've achieved so far. I can only expect bigger and better things to come your way. Um, but continue being who you are. Continue being that great guy that you are for your communities and everybody you're engaging with, man.
Oh man, honestly, like your work in this space is incredible. Like I would not be where I am today or be the person in these roles today without your mentorship, and along with some other great people from MIT as well. Junior Multi Edis had a massive part in myself in terms of the strength and conditioning space. Yourself with the education and the learning space, and Graham just having different yarns here and there, and all the lecturers. I mean, like it is definitely an environment where you learn more about yourself. And I feel like for me personally, if I can try and be better than I was yesterday, then that's a tick in the box for me. So very humbled to be able to work with some amazing people like yourself.
Awesome, Zach. Hey, all the best for 2022. I think we're probably gonna have another conversation, man. I think we have
Oh,
a few things left in the in that kitty bag that we probably can actually go get back and talk about. But we'll leave it for another podcast. Awesome to
yeah,
have you on board.
thank
All the best for the end of the year, and let's hopefully
you.
have a very successful sporting season in 2022, leaving this lockdown behind.
Hopefully, I'm hoping. But no, thanks for having me on. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to come here and chew the fat with you, and just share about my experiences. And I'm very blessed to be able to be here with you. Thanks, man.
Awesome. See you all next week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff that you do with the podcast. Um, we're getting some really good comments. People are finding um, who I'm talking to quite interesting. So again, don't be afraid to share, subscribe, and like, and do all that. And we'll see you next week on the Paddock. Take care, guys.